Blade Runner is the 1982 sci-fi film directed by Ridley Scott that bombed when it first came out, but went on to become a cult classic on the then new home video market. It was Scott's immediate follow-up to Alien, which was itself a follow-up to his historical epic The Duelists, showing the world that this weird British dude was no one-trick pony. Certainly no chance he'd spend his golden years in an increasingly aggravating creative rut. Blade Runner also introduced the wider movie-going world to award-winning, but perpetually struggling, sci-fi author Philip K. Dick, who unfortunately died 3 months before the movie premiered, ending a life that we, his fans, consider far too short, and that he would probably consider far too long. Unless, of course, time is an illusion that actually stopped in the 1st century A.D., and we just think it continued on thanks to the machinations of what the Gnostics called the demiurge. The Empire never ended. It is all around us, even now. Forces within Hollywood started trying to make a movie out of Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep pretty much from the moment it got published in 1968. And it's easy to see why. At the heart of the story, there's a cop whose sole job consists of summarily executing suspects in the street. And what could be more appealing to the American moviegoer than that? My, aren't we cynical today? Yeah, you know, it's almost like I'm talking about some kind of dystopian sci-fi story, where cities span whole horizons, spewing toxic flames and vapid ads into an already poisoned sky, where corporations lord over the rest of us from their massive ziggurats, which are the only place you can still reliably see the sun, where life itself is worth significantly less than those corporations' latest and greatest products. And if you're not cop, you're little people, as the head cop says to our protagonist. Everybody rightly gives Star Trek credit for predicting cell phones, and given how these things let us call up information from pretty much anywhere, ever, they might as well be tricorders at this point. But Dick predicted so much more, it is actually physically terrifying. I was rereading the 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch last year, because Palmer Eldritch is now president of my country. And there's a throwaway line in there about how Antarctica has become the last vacation destination on Earth, since global warming and the lack of an ozone layer combined to make it the only place that's not 200 degrees Fahrenheit by noon. You read that, and then you read news stories about chunks of ice the size of Rhode Island breaking off and starting to float north, and you think, well, we're all fucked. Might as well stay indoors and watch some movies. In a lot of ways, this film and Dick's book are polar opposites. No pun intended. Which is why I'm kind of happy they don't share the same title. Except about once a decade or so, when Dick's publishers release an edition that's titled Blade Runner to bank on that sweet, sweet name recognition. Dick did not trust the machine, for very good and proper reasons. Quoth the Brundlefly, computers are stupid. They only know what you tell them. And how in the hell are you going to tell them to have empathy, let alone sympathy, for other beings, when we humans have struggled with that for our entire recorded history? And failed at it spectacularly by most accounts. Ah, but in the machine, the android, the replicant, whatever, Ridley Scott found beings as much, if not more, capable of empathy than most humans. And certainly more deserving of our sympathy. At least in certain circumstances. Ash, the goddamn robot from Alien, was the real villain of that piece, undeserving of our empathy or sympathy. And like every shit-eating company man throughout time, he gave his worthless sympathies to the rest of the cast at the 11th hour, and got justly flamed for it. He was more of a Dickian android than any of the replicants in this flick. And if Dick were still alive today, he'd certainly recognize David. But while they may have taken the text to a different place, Ridley Scott, screenwriters Hampton Fancher and David Peoples, and everyone else who contributed bits and pieces to this film, i.e., according to some reports, the entire cast, did manage to capture the essence of Philip K. Dick's subtext. I hope this is what Dick saw in the early versions of the film he viewed before a stroke, or a vast intergalactic and extratemporal conspiracy, carried him out of this vale of tears. Unlike most of his contemporaries, who dipped a toe into the pool every once in a while, Dick was obsessed with downright existential questions pretty much all the time. What does it mean to be human in a world as fucked up and weird as ours? How do we go about figuring that out? With our senses? Can we even trust the information they're feeding us? If not, then how in Dante's hell are we going to figure out the nature of life, the universe, God, or hell, anything? And even if we did, could our puny human intellects really handle the answers? Probably not. Most likely we'd just use the information to find new excuses to kill each other. For example, as the opening text crawl we don't really need informs us, a Blade Runner is a cop whose job involves hunting down and retiring, massive air quotes, artificial people. Though their use for shit jobs has become widespread in the off-world colonies, their presence on Earth got outlawed after an uprising several years before our story opens. Our titular Blade Runner is one Rick Deckard, LAPD. He starts the story retired, but in true cop drama tradition, his superiors drag him back to work a case that's already cost them one cop. A group of replicants, led by combat model Roy Batty, staged their own rebellion some months ago, and now they've come to Earth for reasons Deckard must figure out. It's not that hard to figure out, really. Especially not if you know about Philip K. Dick's other major thematic obsession, religion. Especially those esoteric offshoots of Christianity that sprung up in the 3 centuries before the Council of Nicaea hammered the Bible into its current shape. Our boy Roy's quest is a straight-up Gnostic quest to storm heaven and ask God, what the hell, man? What the actual hell? Like V'ger in the first Star Trek movie that preceded this by only 2 years, Roy's questions are as existential as they come. Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? And like Frankenstein's creature, he finds his creator to be little more than a rich dumbass with no real idea of what he's done. You gotta be extra thick, in the old sense, like, to create a whole new race of slaves, and then act surprised when they start chafing at their condition. But then again, the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries are full of that shit. And the true horror of it is, Eldon Tyrell, the replicant's creator, isn't even all that surprised. He's already hard at work on the next generation, and these replicants will come complete with their own fake memories. To give them a cushion, he says. Something to rest their otherwise young and inexperienced emotions on. Though in the very next breath, he also says fake memories will make them easier to control. Like his assistant, Rachel, a replicant with the memories of his niece. And like everything else Tyrell's done, this plan works out so well that Rachel immediately flees from him, the moment she starts to suspect she might not be real. And she flees to the last place anyone might look, the sheltering arms of a Blade Runner. As Roy says to Deckard near the end, quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. And you don't need to get chased through an abandoned apartment by a pissed-off combat replicant in order to feel something like that. After all, Deckard's no Dirty Harry, whatever his job description. He's basically press-ganged into this job with the implicit threat about, if you're not cop, you're little people. So Deckard takes this job, under duress, but also because he doesn't seem to have much of a life outside of it. Like many a person who was, let's say, manufactured the old-fashioned way, Deckard's life is defined by his job, the social role it fills, and the meager social capital that it grants him. So when a patrol car floats down to street level and threatens to arrest him, he can recite a magical incantation to make them disappear. His badge number. The rest of his life seems consumed by consuming whiskey in his shit apartment. Yeah, it might look spacious as hell, but it also looks like it would fit right into the corridors of the Nostromo. In the book, Rachel calls herself and her fellow replicants reflex machines. And in another reversal of Dickian cynicism, Ridley Scott et al. Seem to have cast Deckard in that role. After all, how alive can you really be when your whole life revolves around taking the lives of others? What even makes you feel alive? Well, you could always try sex. Ding ding ding, we have a winner. Nobody can say this picture doesn't have love interest in the most literal sense. But because one side of this relationship is an emotionally repressed, alcoholic, state-sponsored murderer, and the other side just found out that her entire life is a corporate-sponsored lie, laser tattooed onto her brain, it's one of the saddest goddamn bits of love interest in all of sci-fi history. Two people, neither of them anywhere close to a good place, desperately pawing at each other out of the need to feel something more than self-loathing, even for a moment. Again, nothing at all like now. No. Sounds like a delightful way to spend a summer evening. Yeah, it's not hard to see why this one bombed when it came out. And all my trained eye needs to do is take one look at the movie schedule for summer 1982. E.T. just debuted the week before, and was already becoming one of the most popular films of the year. Wrath of Khan and Poltergeist came out the week before that, while Road Warrior, Rocky III, and Conan the Barbarian were all still in theaters at the time. And what's a contemplative, existential, neo-noir sci-fi flick going to do against all that? Especially one that got missold to the public, I would say, as yet another Harrison Ford vehicle, the year after Raiders of the Lost Ark. And lo, the people went looking for another action-adventure flick, and found themselves confronted with long, sweeping shots of a blighted urban hellscape, and a fistful of questions that have frustrated our greatest philosophers. And they reacted mostly with boredom or aggravation. They still do, especially nowadays, when the internet is full of contrarian assholes who are just chomping at the bit to tell you that your favorite movie is a boring, overrated piece of shit. And yes, the walls of my house did just turn to glass there for a second. Thanks for asking. And on the other side, you have the elitist superfans who will gladly shit on anyone who doesn't instantly recognize when Roy starts cribbing lines from William Blake poems. And above us all, you have the Suits, who looked at this film's initial lack of success and gladly went, "There, you see, no one wants to see big questions contemplated by weirdos in retro clothing. They want explosions caused by swashbuckling heroes, played by hot, young actors who are neither hot nor young enough to be intimidating. Or failing that, they want the treacly sentimentality of a Spielberg. Let a million Spielbergs bloom, they said, and lo, it was so. So they took the most superficial aspects of this movie, its production design, particularly the design of Megalopolis, LA, and made that synonymous with dystopian science fiction for the next 2 decades, until the coming of the zombie plague that we're still dealing with at the time of this writing. This is pointless. If your audience is at all film literate, they'll have already formed their opinion about Blade Runner years ago. And who, in God's name, do you think you are that you could possibly affect that? Huh? Besides, we both know they're only waiting around for you to tackle the only important question they have. Is Deckard a replicant? AKA the most boring, pointless question in all of sci-fi. Here's a movie that spends almost 2 hours straight up telling you it doesn't matter whether you're a replicant or not, and the most impassioned section of its fanbase immediately turns around and goes, "Yeah, but is Deckard a replicant, though?" Madness. Madness? This is film fandom. Pick a side in a binary argument or be ignored to death. Besides, without those fans, you'd still be watching the theatrical cut, listening to Harrison Ford's bored voice. That straight up tells you how to feel about stuff by telling you how Deckard feels about stuff. I mean, were test audiences in 1982 really so confused? Need you ask such a question? Yeah, okay, fair enough. These days, the second most frequently asked question is, which of the multiple versions of this movie should I watch? And as far as the film's real messages are concerned, frankly, it doesn't actually matter. This isn't a Kingdom of Heaven or Batman v Superman situation where a whole subplot suddenly disappeared. There's one bit of gore that got cut because it was too hardcore for theaters in 1982. Deckard's voiceover got added in its place, for not really much of a good reason, though Harrison Ford swears he wasn't trying to sandbag it. And honestly, I kind of believe him. And you're obviously not going to see any robot titties in the TV cut. I don't know. Your mileage will vary, I'm sure. Thankfully, these days, you can just buy the Final Cut edition, which has all 5 professionally made versions of this movie in one package, so you don't even have to choose. Another theme of the movie, now that I think about it. Yeah. False binaries are bullshit. Fuck them. These always wind up resembling their subject matters. Have you noticed that? Oh. Is that why this has become such a scattershot mess? Hey, you said review Blade Runner. As usual, you didn't say which one. Though the one you probably meant should be out by the time I'm done with this. In the meantime, I have another, more modern Ridley Scott film for you to tackle. Oh, hell. You had to remind me, didn't you? Happy New Year.